Hi everyone, my name's David. I'm currently using Draftbit to build a new application. And as I've been doing this, I've been trying to figure out how to validate forms. And this is a short video just to explain how I've managed to set up forms that allow us to both provide real-time feedback to the user to make sure they're entering valid fields, and then to validate before submitting through the API. Very briefly, I just want to show you how my three screens are set up before I build a new screen. So here's a list of palettes. Each one has to have 6 colors in it. Each of these can be edited, and you go through there and hit the edit. But the screen I'm interested in building in this tutorial is this one here called Add Palette. So a very simple add screen. And briefly, before I go into building a duplicate of it, I thought it's worth just explaining how it performs today. So right now, if I enter in a new palette, so I'll just call this my new dummy palette, then the error message has gone away. As soon as I put in invalid characters, the error message will come back. And likewise, as I go through entering in new colors, if I put in a red, it appears. If I ever enter any invalid characters, I either make it a non-hex character, or I make it too short or too long, then it will be considered invalid and have the error message. So that provides immediate feedback to the user. And then finally, if I try and hit add palette when there's an error, nothing will happen. Whereas if I do complete this screen and I enter in valid colors, so let's just do this briefly. A, F, F, A. There we go. This time it should submit. The navigation is not perfect, but if we come back into view palette, we can see here's my new dummy palette. So that is working. So that's what we're trying to build this in this video. I'm going to start by creating a new screen. I'll create a blank screen. Now I have some trouble sometimes when I rename my screen, so let's see if this works or not. I'll go in here and say create palette rather than add palette. Oh, that's looking good. It's updated immediately. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to start by adding some components in. So let's add a couple of views. I'll add 3 views. I'm going to do a simplified screen for this demo. In the first one, I'm going to add a row. Let's come down. And then within the row, I'm going to add a text box, a text input box, and a custom component. And as you can guess, it's the custom component that makes it dynamic. So where are we? Here's text. Here is text input. And then finally, here's custom code. On the next one down, I'll just add all the components. I'm actually going to go a slightly different way. I'm going to add custom code. And then I'm going to add the text input box. And then on the final, oh, I forgot to add my row, 1 second. Let's go back, add a row in here. Drop these in. Okay, so that, hopefully that's right, yep. And then on the final one, I'll just add a button. And then obviously what we're going to do is spend a few minutes just configuring each of the components, and then we can go and have a look at the custom code. So I'm going to just skip through this relatively quickly. This is a component called text. That's fine for now, I think. Let's just add the basic text and say name. Let's go in. Let's make it bold. We probably in the row, we want to make everything central, so that all lines up. Then in the text input box, it's probably more important we get this one right. So we're going to call this one palette name. We'll have the field name of simply name. And again, I'll just change the placeholder to palette name. Oops. Right, and that's all left justified at the moment. I could center it all, but perhaps for speed we'll not bother with that. Coming down into the next one here, we've got another text input box. We're going to call this one color 1, and placeholder text of color 1. Okay, and on the button solid, coming down in here, we'll call this create palette. We will give it add palette as the default text. Okay, so I could fiddle around a bit more, add centering, make it a bit better formatted, but for the purposes of this, I think it's more important we go in and look at how we're going to add the custom code to display the errors. Right, so to start off with, I'm going to come in here. Because I've already shown you the screens, you can see I already have the component code in here. I'm going to start right down at the bottom with two very simple custom functions. So the first function actually I'll talk about is export function validate name. This takes a single property of string name. Here's a big long regex expression. The expression basically, without going into too much detail, excludes special characters. We then create a function valid where we try and match against the regex. If it matches, great, we return true. If it doesn't, returns false. Something slightly strange in here. I would have thought I could just return valid rather than this slightly clunky syntax, but for some reason it didn't work when I did the simple return valid, so not quite sure why. Very similar for the hex color. So validate hex takes again a simple variable string color. We have the simple regex that validates that it's a valid piece of a valid hex code. Does the match and then returns true or false. So having looked at these two simple validate functions, how do we use them to give the feedback? If I come up to the top in here, we've got one function which we're calling export constant name valid. Name valid takes a string name, runs it through that custom function, and then effectively it's in an if statement that switches depending on the result of that custom function. So if it's not valid, so this is a if not valid, then we're going to show the icon, else we're going to return nothing and it's going to be blank. The second one here is called select circle. It's probably not the right name for this function, given that I'm returning squares now just by turning off the rounding of the corners. But exactly the same principle, it takes a set of properties, and when we drop the custom code in, we'll add those properties from the fields that we've already configured. And in here, here's your if validate hex selected color. We're going to return an error, else we're going to return the circle itself or the little correctly colored square to show you that what color you're adding to your palette. And that's really it. So we have two functions that validate the input from the user as that field gets updated, and then we have two components that we're going to display on the page. Okay, so what do? We come into custom code. Let me get this right. I'm just going to make sure I do custom code dot. Now, what did I call that one? 1 second. Call that one name valid. It takes the parameter string name, and we're going to just pass across the field name that we've already created. And that should be it. Right, so at the moment the field is blank and therefore we're getting the icon. If I start entering any simple characters, so foobar, good old foobar, then that's absolutely fine. It'll accept numerics, that's absolutely fine. If we go a bit crazy though, we start trying to enter in an email address. Again, it's not going to like that, and it's going to throw the error. So this is our demo palette. Now, obviously there's only one color in it. So the next thing to say is, how do we do it for the custom color? Well, exactly the same way. We're going to come in here, we're going to add the component we just looked at, which was called select circle. So custom code dot select circle selected color equals color 1, d selected color equals color 1 as well, and all being well, yep. So that at the moment we haven't got a color in place, so it's showing an error. If we enter in a color, let's see, let's go for, there we go. It's showing the green. Now obviously the formatting's a bit messy here, it's not quite as neat as the screen I showed earlier, and that in a nutshell is how we've, with two simple components and two simple validate functions, been able to provide that visual feedback to the user. Clearly there's more we could do with that, so if we had a slightly different layout we wouldn't need to actually return the icon. What I could do instead is I could just return some text. So let's try invalid name. Why are you not happy with that? No. I think we don't want the brackets, is that right? Yeah, we're not wanting brackets. Okay, save that, and now it should refresh. Oh dear, maybe not. Maybe I'm trying to be too clever. Slightly odd, because I thought I had got that working before. I'll give it one last shot, see if that works. Yes, so now we get the invalid name rather than the icon. Not as pretty, so I think we'll go back and replace that again. I don't like to throw everything all over the place. Right, let's save that again. And we're back to that. The second half of this tutorial is, obviously this is providing visual feedback to the user, but it's not actually properly stopping you from submitting an invalid record through your API. To do that, we have to do that in the add palette function itself. So if I come into this button, I come across in here. Now this one here, we've got to add a few functions and sort of stack them up together to make this work. Give me 1 second. Make sure I'm following what I need to do. The first thing I need to do is add some custom functions. So what I'm going to do, if I come in here, I'm going to add a validate hex function, very similar to the function that we already saw within the custom component. So let's have a look at this one. Again, it's going to take a parameter of string color, and in here we're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going to add the regex expression and validate against that. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to turn the stringified versions of if true or false. So we're returning the string true or string false, and then we'll run that through the Boolean parser as part of the execution of the custom function. Personally, I find that a bit clunky and a bit odd. I don't know why it didn't work for me when I just did return true or return false, but this seems to be the workaround that's worked for me. So that's our first function. We obviously need to add a second function, which is validate name. So in here, validate name, I'm going to take a string name as a function. Again, just for brevity, I'm copying the code across from the other screen. So sort out all my typos. Okay, so it's the same as we saw within the custom component, with the exception of I'm returning it stringified rather than returning actual variables. Next thing I need to do, if I come back again, is I need to do the throw error function. So this is what's going to stop execution if there's an error. So here we go, create one more. This one we'll call throw error. And this one, in the screen that we looked at before, took 7 parameters. It took the 7 fields plus the 6 colors plus the name. We've only got 1 on this screen, so I'm going to call this valid name as well. So we've got v name and we've got color 1. So in here, all we're doing is saying if not. So basically, when we run through the stacked up functions, each function is going to return true or false. If it's coming back as false, then we basically want to throw this error. So I'll get rid of the other colors, but we have if not color 1 or if not valid name, throw not all fields are valid. Okay, so we now have 3 custom functions for this screen, and that should just allow us in here to start building out a set of actions that validates the form before it gets submitted to the API. So I'll start with validate name. So we call this one vName, and as the string argument we want to pass in name, and we don't want to transform that, so that's done. Next we want to validate the color. So again, we're going to come in here, we're going to do validate hex. I'm going to call this, I'm going to call v color 1, and we're going to pass across the state color 1. Okay, next what we're going to do is run the custom function throw error. So here we want to take, for the color 1, the valid color 1 result, and as I sort of touched on, we want to pass boolean this because we've had to return back a string. And again in here for vName, we're going to pass in vName, and again we're going to pass the boolean. And I think I have tried, but I haven't managed to get this to work, that it would pass back that error message, and I would then be able to pass that into a global variable and from there display it on the screen. For whatever reason, I haven't managed to get that to work. It's a part of my knowledge I'm still struggling with in terms of how do you get how do you use the various different types of variables within Draftbit. It's something I think would be really helpful to clarify further. And then assuming that we haven't thrown an error, then we should be able to make an API request. The back end I'm using is Supabase. So in here, this is Supabase, and we're going to create a palette. So I'm going to do that. Now, obviously, we don't have 6 colors. What I'm going to do for this little demo is I'm going to pass name, and I'm going to pass the same color 6 times. Color 1, color 1, color 1, color 1, color 1. Color 1. Okay, and then finally the last thing I want to do is take me back to, ideally, to the view palette screen. However, view palette screen I have within the button tab navigator at the bottom, which is a bit clunky because I think typically also in the view tab navigator is the home page. Presumably there is a way to pass the right data to get me to the page. I just haven't got that far yet. Right, so I think we're at a point where we can give this a shot and see if it works. So here is my my demo palette. What should we do? Make this one bright green. Cross our fingers. Taking us to the home. We're going to navigate across to view palettes, and there it is exactly as we'd hoped. If I drop across into Superbase over here, so this is the back end, you can see some other demo palettes I've played with, and hopefully this one here which says it's valid, if I scroll across, there's my demo palette. So that's all working. And I think that's enough for this tutorial. Hopefully that's explained how you can provide feedback to your user as they're working through, and then properly validate the fields before you submit to the API. Hopefully this was useful. Thanks very much. Bye for now.